Professor Dr. Felix Tongkul is an eminent individual with a notable background in the field of geology. He served as a professor of geology in the Faculty of Sciences and Natural Resource at Universiti Malaysia Sabah. He is a Distinguished Academy of Sciences Malaysia ASM Fellow. Professor Dr. Felix has left a significant impact in the field of geology, geotourism, and indigenous empowerment. His contributions to research, education, and community development have established him as a respected figure in his field and a source of inspirations for aspiring geologists and advocates of indigenous rights alike. So, without further ado, give a round of applause to Professor Felix for his talk, The Tropical Forest, 113 million years old. Prof. Felix, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fifi, for the introduction. A very good morning to everyone. I'm extremely happy to see there's a lot of people here physically and also online. I saw there are more than 200 registered participants online. So it seems that this topic does attract people's interest. Yeah? I've been wanting to give this talk for a while, but didn't have the chance to do it. Yeah? And we were talking about this before the pre-COVID time. And I said, oh, we have to wait until people, come back. And then probably it's easier for us to meet physically. I think it's always best to meet physically. You can meet online, but nothing can beat physical presence. And I really appreciate all of you who came today. So this topic was mooted some time ago, and we were, basically aiming this for tour guides, because we felt that there's a lot of probably not so correct information going around, and we don't want to perpetuate this. So this morning I'll try to explain a little bit about this topic. You must realize that I'm not a botanist, so you will be disappointed probably if you don't hear me talking about plants too much, but I'll be, talking more on the geological aspect. Yeah? Okay. So this is the outline of my presentation. After some introduction, I thought introduction will be quite useful here because most of you probably are not familiar with some geological terms. And then, of course, I'll talk a little bit about the paleogeography of Southeast Asia. And then the main one, the geology of Sabah. All these are going to be given briefly. And then the geological evolution of Sabah. And the fifth one would be on the paleogeography of Sabah. And the main part will be the fossil record of the tropical forest. And finally, some possible age for our rainforest in Sabah. So there's a progression there, yeah? So let's look at what we have as an introduction. As mentioned by Dr. Rahim just now, it's been synonymous in Sabah to mention the forest as 130 million years old. And if you ask someone, where did you get that age? They said, somehow it's written somewhere. And if you ask whose source provided that age, and nobody knows. It's probably mentioned somewhere long time ago. And probably it was referring to probably the age of the rock. This was probably in Denham Valley. And yes, the rocks, they are actually more than 130 million years old. But the whole thing is that, is the forest the same as the age of the rocks? This is something that we have to learn. Yeah? Because if the rock even if the rock is 200 million years old, if it's still under the sea, at that time, there's no way the forest can grow under the sea. And so this is something that we have to actually learn. So I will try to give you some very brief geological information on that. So we know that the rainforest, basically the tropical rainforest, is controlled very much by climate. And so we're looking at an area, in a dry, very wet area along the equatorial zone. So I think we just have to bear that in mind. Because we also have temperate forests, yeah? Rainforest. Now, in terms of how do we determine the age of an ancient forest, yeah? This has to be mentioned. Because if you look at what it meant by forest, people have different, way of explaining the forest. For example, if you look at the back and they said, how old is that forest outside here? And you might say that, oh, this is quite recent. This used to be a place whereby, there's none here, nothing here. Now the forest has already grown here. So you're talking about probably 40, 50 years old forest, isn't it? And then if you go to Danam or you go look at the Coco Range forest, then people will ask you, how old is that forest? I've said, who knows? But we know that a tree, big tree, some can live for 3,000 years old, but basically, tropical forests, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I read, the age of a tropical forest, maximum is about 500 years old only. 500 years old and it will die and new plants will come. And so it, regenerates and you have new plants coming up. Now, if you want to refer to the age of the forest, it's a difficult issue. Do you get it? So then you'll say, so how do you determine then the age of the forest? What do you really mean by that? So basically what we actually mean today is that the age of the forest refers to the forest who has been at a place at a particular time for a long time. We're not referring to a particular tree because they, die and being replaced by new ones. So that's what we meant here. And so, to be able to determine the age of the forest, you must connect it to the land. You must connect it to the rock types. Only then you can understand better what we are saying, isn't it? Otherwise, probably if you don't connect it with geology, then probably it's difficult to determine the age of that particular forest. And that's our... So, how do we determine? Mostly, this is based on the presence of plant fossils, as you might have already expected, such as those shown here. There's leaves, you have pollens, spores, and you can also, apart from that, you can also infer from the presence of coals, for example. I mean, if you find coal, there must be a forest somewhere, isn't it? And then, of course, that would be how we determine the age of the forest. Okay. But before that, I would like to get into you this geological time scale, because we are talking about 130 million years, isn't it? Whereas I said, trees can only grow about 500 years. So how come we are talking about so long ago? So in terms of the geological scale, you're talking very long time here. The geological time scale shown here describes all the geological history evolution, as you can see. I don't have a pointer here. So from the bottom, you can see how they are divided into several events, yeah? Starting from 4.6 billion years ago. And so we have division, we have eons, We have eras, we have periods, we have epochs to describe all this. And then, of course, in terms of the geological timescale, we have undergone 5 catastrophic events that basically occurred. You can see it from that point over there. And these are events whereby there's a possibility of a huge destruction, a death of living plants, animals. So you can actually see that forests, even if they have grown millions of years ago, doesn't continue as it is because there's a lot of geological events happening. Some area might once be land, but the next after several million, it goes down under and becomes sea. And there, if your forest is there, your forest will be drowned. And so that is why we need to have this scale. But of our interest is that of the evolution of plants. This is based on the fossil pollen. The popular one is this Clavotypollinites. This is found worldwide. And of course from leaves, especially from fruits. And angiosperm or flowering plants, which make up most of our rainforests as of now, appeared between 120 at 130 million years ago, but did not fully evolve until after the meteorite impact around 66 million years ago. This is the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, if you look at that over there. And so you can actually see here that plants only evolved quite recently in terms of geological time scale. Yeah? So you're looking at that. Now, the other thing as an introduction is how do you determine whether a place is already land or sea? Because this has some bearing on whether our forest has a place to grow. Isn't it? Yeah. So, you can actually determine whether a place is already a land mass, continental land mass, by looking at the fossil records of rocks, whether those rocks were formed in rivers, lake, deserts, glaciers, and that sort of thing. Yeah? So it will actually tell us whether land already existed by looking at the type of rocks around us. For example, around here in Kota Kinabalu, we have a lot of rocks here. Probably you've noticed as you drive along the road, you find some layered rocks. These are basically layered sandstone with mudstone. And they have been referred to as the Croco Formation. And the age of this rock is about maybe 30, 40 million years old. And this was deposited in a deep sea environment. And how do we know that? Based on some fossil evidence found within the rocks. So basically now we are sitting on top of an uplifted rocks who came from the sea 40 million years ago. You get what I mean? So what we see now doesn't have to be like this in the past future. So it keeps changing. And that's why we need to understand this. And the other crucial thing that we have to remember is that we know that that particular environment existed if we find, rocks that exist now on land. For example, we have conglomerates. We call this gravel. If you go to the river and you find a lot of this gravel, so definitely if you find ancient gravel, then definitely you're looking at a river deposit. And that means that land must have existed. Otherwise, the river would not be there. So it's inferring indirectly or directly. The other one is coal, as I said. If you see coal, that means that although coal might be deposited in a swampy area, but you need the land to produce the swampy area. So there must be land nearby. there must be lots of trees nearby also. And also, of course, you like to see rain prints. Rain prints are, if you look at the rocks and you see a lot of rain prints on it, definitely it's already above the sea. Rain prints cannot be produced underwater. Those are the examples. And of course, another one is this cross-beddings. Cross-beddings normally occur in fast-flowing water. And that would happen in rivers also. So if you see rocks which have a lot of cross-beddings, then the moment you look at it, you know where you are in terms of its depositional setting. These are some of the background. Of course, there's a lot of other things, but I'll just mention a few for us. Now, the other thing that I want to introduce is this concept of plate tectonics. Very interesting concept, whereby the theory suggests that our Earth is made up of like an outer shell. Just imagine like a boiled egg. You know, boiled egg. You boil the egg, you cut it into half. What you get is that shell, that's the Earth's crust. The white part, that's the mantle. And the yellow part, the tastiest part, it's not the tastiest part. The yellow part is the core of the Earth. And that provides the energy for convection, as you can see from that cartoon there. And that actually propels all this plate, which is broken into 7 major plates. It's like, imagine your boiled egg, you crack it, and so all these cells are moving around on top of the white part of the egg. And so you can see, all this has been happening for millions of years. And you can actually see a reconstruction down here, whereby Africa and South America used to be one. And Australia and Antarctic used to be one. You can see that one there. And animation on top is the one, a recent one. That those numbers are in million years ago. You can see. And so, what happened is that we have opening of mid-oceanic ridge that produces all new oceanic crust. And then at the same time, all this will be destroyed when it goes underneath. And that's called a subduction place, whereby oceanic crust will then be accreted. This is a term that I want to use. Accreted, meaning that when you have this oceanic crust that goes down, for example, that way, what happens is all the sediment on top will be scraped off and attached and added. And that's how continents actually evolve. They start from a small core and then get bigger and bigger because of this accretion, because of this scraping of the rocks on top. And it adds. So I hope that introduction of geology will give you the idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so as you can see, the figure on the right at the bottom to the left shows a cartoon whereby you have opening of the sea. At the same time, you have the plate or the lithosphere going under. And that's called subduction. So I'll be referring to a lot of this subduction. And when you have 2 continents, hitting each other, that would be collision. So you have subduction when you have oceanic crust going down, but if you have another continent colliding with each other, then we call it collision. And a good example of collision would be India colliding with Asia. But before that, before India collided, there was subduction under Asia. And actually, Himalayan mountains, Mount Everest, was born out of this collision. So, if you go to the mountains now in Nepal, you can still see all these fossils from the sea on top of the mountain. And so you can imagine that it once used to be under the sea, near the sea at least. Yeah? So this is how geology is. It's very interesting. If you understand this, wherever you go, it's always exciting. Because you just turn around, you see something, and you can imagine what happened long time ago. And when you talk about long time ago, you're talking about millions of years ago. And it's really, really exciting. I mean, exciting for me. I don't know about you. Yes. Based on all this information, a friend of mine, Robert Hall, a long time ago, he was my colleague in the University of London, so we worked together. He came up with this paleogeography of Southeast Asia. So as I said earlier, the Asia started with a small part as the Sundaland. This was established already about 300 million years ago. The area in Sundaland has already been established. And slowly, as I said, due to subduction, sediments and rocks from the ocean floor were scraped and added on to that part. And then, as you can see, I'll go quickly. This is briefly. And if you see this paleogeographic model, to the one to the left there is the oldest, which is about 50 million. I can't see from here. Yeah, and you can actually see, if you are referring to Borneo, most of Borneo is still under the sea. So for your reference, the dark blue color is sea, under the sea. The light blue color is shallow sea, and the brownish is land, and the yellow is already highlands at that time. Yeah. So remember this color. I'll be using the same color for Sabah later on. So again, blue for sea, light blue, sky blue for shallow sea. Then the brownish, light brownish would be land. Okay? So you can see that it evolves slowly. And then if you can actually see, rocks began to be added to the process of subduction and accretion since 130 million years ago. So you already got a hint here that your forest cannot be actually existing 130 million when we are just starting to form. So you're already getting some hint that probably, it cannot be. Now that you understand a little bit of geology. But some of you might ask, how sure are you that this thing is happening? As such, of course, we have to rely on years of scientific research done by people. There's nothing much you can say more about that. Yeah. And so, as it evolved, we look at that slowly, part of Southeast Asia was actually, there was a sea in between, and slowly as it grows, if you follow the picture from 20 million years until 5 million years ago, then you have Australia coming up and then colliding with Southeast Asia. And that's how we actually form Southeast Asia now. It's a long story, but I have no time to really explain on this one because this is just a background information for you. Okay? And so, now we want to, the paleogeography of South Asia is already there, but we want to zoom on to a particular area, Borneo or Sabah, so that this paleogeographic reconstruction is very rough. It's very generalized. Yeah? You can see from here that, if I reverse this a little bit, you can see about 50 million years ago, according to this paleogeographic reconstruction, Sabah, a lot of Borneo was still under the sea. But of course, it is not, because this reconstruction is very general. So we'll be zooming into this reconstruction later. And this is what I'm going to show you later. But before that, before we do the paleogeography of Sabah, a reconstruction of Sabah, we must have some understanding of the geology first. So I will just go briefly, just tell you the gist of the geology, so that you have enough knowledge about it to actually appreciate what I'm saying. So basically, this is a simplified geological map of Sabah. The oldest rock found in Sabah would be around the Ulu Segama. this within Danam. So that's why dam is very, very important, because this is where you find the oldest rock in Sabah. Probably the recent datings done by one of my colleagues who did a PhD there, they got 250 million years old rock. But that rock was intruding into an older rock. So I assume that that older rock must be more than 250 million years old. So you're talking about probably 300 million years old rock in Danam Valley. And this rock is not difficult to find. If you go to Danam, you've been to Danam, you just go down to that river where the center is, you walk a little bit, then you find all those rocks there. Then you realize that you are among 300 million years old rocks. And you'll be touching those rocks. But don't make a mistake that you're talking about the forest. You're talking about the rocks there. But just holding a 300 million years old rock, I think gives you some, some sense of, past, ancient past. That's how I felt, I just joke about it. Oh, I'm now stepping on some very ancient stuff. That Glenn probably is, very happy because he's stepping on, living on top of very old rocks there. Yeah. Of course, it follows that you have the oldest rocks in Danam. It follows that the forest must have evolved starting from there. Yeah, of course, it does. It does follow. But when is the question? When did it start, isn't it? But to answer that, we just have to know when did actually that part rose up and become land. Because once it became land, forest or vegetation will definitely start growing. What type of vegetation is a different question, but if it's in tropics, if we know that we're already in the tropical area at that particular time, bang, it's a tropical forest. It cannot be anything else. Isn't it? That's how we get into that, deducing it. Yeah. So this is the oldest rock. This is basically basalt and periodite. This is ultra basic, but they are actually metamorphosed. It's very weird looking rocks, very old looking rocks. You look at it, you're scared looking at it. No, it's just a normal rock. And then, of course, the next oldest rock would be this typical oceanic crust. We call this ophiolites in Sabah. You can find it in Lahadatu. We also find it in Tandik, Kutamarudu, where this is part of the Kinabalu Geopark, where we are promoting this, one of these oldest rock in that area. Of course, this is dated within the range of about 90 to 130 million years old. Okay, so we said, wow, we have another rock of 130 million. There must be a forest now. We'll see later. Most of these are deposited in a deep sea environment. Definitely no forest, isn't it? Cannot be. Cannot be a forest there because most of the rocks that we find are actually produced in a deep sea environment. Then next one. Wow, we're getting shallower here. We have Madai. So Madai, that's one of our oldest limestone. This is about 90 to 130 million years old. It's been dated. So meaning that we have shallow seas. So you have hope. Now we are getting some land coming up. Because you cannot be having these reefs or limestone without some upliftment from below. And fortunately, we have evidence in Sapulut of a conglomerate, but much, much younger, unfortunately. So this has been dated as 60 to 90 million years old. So with the presence of conglomerate, definitely land existed somewhere. Yeah? Whether there's a forest or not, that's a different thing altogether. That we have to see later. So this is somewhere found around here. Now, after that, around the other areas, within that time, most of the area are actually quite deep, deep sea area. You have the red Sapulut mudstone found in Sapulut. You have the Trusmade sediments. You look at them, they're full of muds. Most of them are actually deposited in very deep water. Maybe 2,000, 3,000 meters below. according to some of those forums of microfossils that we've seen. And then, of course, towards about 50 million years ago, we have another limestone. Most of you probably doesn't know this limestone. It's called Pun Batu limestone. And this Pun Batu limestone actually is located somewhere in Sapulut also. And this has been dated as 50 million years old. So now we're talking 50 million. Not only do we have conglomerates, now we have limestones coming up. Meaning that the more possibility of land increasing. So you can see this is an old photo of mine where we used to have that Land Cruiser. We looked at classic Land Cruiser. This is from UKM Sabah time. We did this fieldwork long time ago, more than 20 years ago. And of course, we have a lot of this croco. So if you look at the sediments, in Kota Kinabalu, as I said, you are looking at 40, 50 million years old, deep sea sandstones and mudstones. And finally, as you get younger, we have another one called the Gamantong limestone. Most of you know where Gamantong is, around Sukau area. This has been dated around 25 to 30 million years old. And it has been deposited in a very shallow kind of environment. And if you look at the limestone itself, there's a lot of class that black thing there are actually mudstones. So this indicate that while this limestone reefs was forming, there's land nearby being eroded and being mixed with that reef. That's how important that sample is. It tells us the paleogeography of that particular area in Sukau. This is taken from Sukau. And of course, the interesting about Sabah is you have this red sandstone. Actually, it's around the Kulapis. This is along the way we call the highway that people refer to as the highway where it looks like the moon. You know where is that? Somewhere between Baluran, that kind of Sandakan, a stretch. So this is where you see all this reddish sand. Most of this probably there's a lot of erosion coming from land. There's already land at this time, bringing a lot of iron oxides, and then coloring all these sands. Interesting, isn't it? Based on that, you know a little bit about the paleogeography of that area. Now, of course, we also have Batu Tulug in Batu Putih. This is about 25, 30 million years. And of course, we also have in Labuan. Most of the rocks there actually are quite young. In Labuan, it's about 10 to 15 million years ago. And most of these, they have conglomerates there. So it's already like very shallow. You have gravel there. And another one is we have 10 to 15 million years, Balambangan limestone. You know where Balambangan limestone is? There's a very nice cave inside. I'm sure the two guides have already been there. And this also shows that part of that area was very shallow at the time. And of course, we have shallow sea for the Kapilit, as you can see in the Maleo Basin. In the Maleo Basin, you have a lot of evidence for cross-bedding. Can you see all those cross-bedding? Fast-flowing river probably. There's some areas here. And of course, as we grow younger, in terms of geological age, we have these Tabanak conglomerates, lots of conglomerates in Lahadatu. Indeed, the POIC is underlain by this Tabanak conglomerate. This has been dated as about 5 to 10 million years ago. So you're talking about huge land at the moment. Then, of course, in Belait also, this is somewhere in Kuala Penyu, the Belait conglomerate is said. So by this time, 10 million years, a lot of land already existed. Yeah. And of course, finally, if you reach at Klias, 1 or 2 million, you see a lot of conglomerate. And you have Pinosuk Glacial, 10 to 50,000 years ago. You have that glacial from Mount Kinabalu. Those are considered deposit. Those are the youngest, most of the youngest deposit. And of course, I just want to mention about volcanic activity. While we are having sedimentary rocks being deposited, we also have some volcanic activities. We have shallow sea environment for the Tawau Hill andesites. There are lots of volcanoes between 1 to 5 million years ago, there was a lot of explosion going on in Tawau. And people keep asking me, is this going to be active again? They're not active anymore. But you still see a very nice cones there. Yeah? And of course, most of these are already land, and Mount Kinabalu granite was intruded about 7 to 9 million years ago. So, there you go. Those are the, gist of the geology of Sabah. There's a lot of things, it can be a separate lecture by itself, but just to give you an idea about what are the rock types in Sabah. And based on this, then we can work out some geological evolution. So how did Sabah came out then? So I'll just show you a cartoon, a very simplified cartoon here, whereby we assume about maybe more than 200 million years ago until 100 million years ago, most of Sabah was sea. Probably there's little dots of small islands, as I said. And then everything was accreted, and probably the sea at that time was part of the Paleo-Pacific Oceanic crust, because this connects with the Pacific Oceanic. This is the older part of the Pacific. Yeah? And then what happened? There's continued subduction, accretion of materials, the land become bigger. Most of this has been raised, some volcano activity happening, especially about 60 million years ago. And then you have more land. And then as you move further, especially towards the Oligocene, early Miocene, this is the 20 to 35 million years ago, Central Sabah rifted. Remember, you have this and then started rifting, opening up. And this opening up is important because without this, the Malaya Basin would have not formed. So it started opening up and causing a lot of these sediments, all those broken melange deposit. This is very important also. This broken formation is one of the main cause of why you have moon structure in Baluran Road. Because underlying that is called this melange deposit. It's broken up rocks. It's difficult to build a road on top because there's no solid rock like KK. KK, you can find a layering. There, it's all broken up. When it's broken up, you put a road, it starts sinking. And so it's very difficult. You can't blame GKR actually for that. Now that I've told you, we cannot. Because no matter how much money they spend, it still keeps sinking and then being, destroyed in a matter of months because of the condition underneath. Now, about 10 to 15 million years, we have a lot of this circular basin, including the Tanjung, the Malaya Basin, for example, are forming on top of that. Yeah? And of course, at the same time also, soon Mount Kinabalu will be intruded. And finally, about 2 to 9 million years ago, everything was like compressed again. And now started coming up. And it is coming up now. Still coming up. There's a lot of collision. That's why we still have a lot of some earthquake activity because of all this compression, ongoing compression. So this is a very brief geological evolution for you to understand. Yeah. Okay? So far, so good? Okay, I'm getting to the point now. So, based on all this information also, I'd like to talk about the paleogeography of Sabah. Meaning, what was the geography, distribution of land, sea, and, uplands at that time. So, as you have already known by now, Sabah was born out from an ancient floor. It just came from the floor, basically. Yeah? About 250 million years ago, and subduction, as I said, accreted, and about 90 million years ago, this land became enlarged, and then with collision, you produce what we see now. Land coming up from the sea, and we have Mount Kinabalu, as the picture shows here. Yeah? So you can imagine it to be happening. So it's a gradual thing. Imagine a sea slowly becomes very shallow, and then land become appearing and slowly become enlarged. Yeah? And probably it's still happening now, enlarging. Who knows, yeah? So, this is a paleogeography model that I've been working on. So about 200 million years ago, Sabah was probably still underwater. As you can see, it's all blue. It's the sea, deep sea. And there was already volcanic activity, some parts in the southeastern part of Sabah. There's already volcanic activity because of the subduction, as I said. So Danam Valley, Proto-Danam Valley is already forming at that time. You got the message? Yeah? And then it starts moving up because of all this plate coming up. And then by 130 million years ago, there's a possibility that part of Sabah, eastern part of Sabah, is now emerging, but there's still no land yet. Shallow sea, and you have the Madai reefs being formed. Basically, become Madai limestone later. You get the point? So around that area, there will be a lot of these reefs forming. No land yet. So there goes your 130 million year old forest. It's debunked already. If we are debunking myths. But anyway, this is good, you know. Now you can appreciate, oh yes, 130 million means something. It means something, it's just that it probably doesn't mean that the forest is already there. And so, there's a lot, if you can see the light green, a light blue there, that's where it's coming up. And actually coming up all the way. This is connected to the whole Borneo, to the southern part, Sarawak and Kalimantan side. And by about 110 million, this continue, and now it's being enlarged. Sabah expanding but still under the sea. Expanding but under the sea is a different thing altogether. And then this is the most interesting part, by 90 million years ago, this is the late Cretaceous time, definitely we already have evidence of land. We already have gravels. We already have conglomerates at that time. Apart from, you know, the volcanoes happening here. So early land mass expected in Sabah at that time, but still a lot are under the sea. And if you move further, about 60 million years ago, this is the early Paleocene, you can actually see that larger mass is forming, not only in Southeast Sabah, but now going into central part of Sabah, opening up that area here. Yeah? So getting shallower and smaller. Then by 45 million, this is the mid-Miocene. And if you notice, on the north, on the top part of that slide, on the left top part, you have this continental margin of China coming down. Yeah? It's being rifted, basically. It's being rifted on the northern side. But this picture doesn't provide that. Yeah? You need a bigger scale to see all this. Yeah? But my focus is on Sabah now. So we have more land mass now, as you can see. You have the Pun Batu Reefs. As I said, Pun Batu Reefs, the age of that limestone is 50 million years old. So definitely you already have that reefs coming. So by this time, Sapulut area, near Sapulut area would be more land already. If you know where Sapulut is. And then by 30 million, this is the middle Oligocene time. There's a large mass of land already in eastern and central part of Sabah. Not the northern part, but huge area. And you start forming highlands already, uplands for the central part. But still, we still find a lot of this shallow marine around it. And by 20 million years ago, this is the early part of Miocene. You can see most of Sabah has now emerged, and most of it now quite shallow. And the northern, we have volcanoes, Tungku volcanoes during this time, about 20. You can still see these volcanoes in Lahadatu. And of course, you have Batu Punggul, you have Batu Putih, a lot of limestones, reefs actually coming up. And including, if you want to extend the picture a bit, near reefs would be at the same time forming at the same time. Yeah? If you want to put the picture a little bit. By 15 million, this is the mid-Miocene time, you can actually see that the whole area has now been closed. The sea, if you remember, there's a sea in between the continental margin of southern China and Sabah has now closed. It's all closed now. Subduction completed. Now we have collision. So this is the time whereby Sabah started coming up. Because when you are having subduction, the plate goes down, it doesn't really uplift things, the landmass. But once it's finished, and you have this continental margin of southern China now colliding with the newly formed landmass of Sabah, what happened is that you have to come up because of that collision. It's like building the Himalayan mountains and where Everest slowly climb up because India collided with southern part of Asia. You get the picture? More or less similar like this. So it's now coming up. But the most interesting also is about 15 million. You have this opening in the central part of Sabah, whereby we have a lot of this shallow marine and where all these sediments in the Maleo Basin, the Imbak Canyon, and all these kind of areas are being formed. Interesting, isn't it? Forget about Danam. Danam has been done long time ago. It's already land, long time ago. Yeah. Now, by 10 million, the whole thing has now changed. As I said, the Proto-South China Sea has closed. Now you have the Propo-South China Sea in existence. And most of Sabah has now emerged on land, except for some parts in central Sabah. In central Sabah, this is the area where you have in Maleo Basin area. There's some parts there still under the sea because we still have young rocks there. They're about less than 10 million years old. We still have that. So meaning that you still have a sea there. Because you cannot deposit sediments without the sea. You can deposit in rivers, but they are very limited. This is how we, deduct things. Yeah. And so, 5 million years ago, this is most of Sabah has emerged, except for some parts under Sandakan area. Why? Sandakan area is very slow to come up. If you look at the rocks in Sandakan, these are Sandakan Formation rocks. They are very young rock, very young. They go all the way up to 5 million years old. And they are still, the deposit is shallow marine. It's more or less like, coastal kind of environment. Very shallow, but still submerged under the sea. There might be islands, but we're not very particular here. We don't know the specifics. And so, almost emerged. And this is what we see as of today. So at present time, you still have compression, both sides. So Sabah is being, squeezed in between, so to say. And now we are slowly being uplifted. People were saying that, wow, Mount Kinabalu is coming up. Is it true? They asked me. I said, basically, Mount Kinabalu cannot be coming up because that would be quite dangerous. What happened is that the whole Borneo is coming up. And together with Mount Kinabalu, because Mount Kinabalu was formed 7 to 9 million years ago. It's dead already. So what is happening now is that together with the whole Borneo landmass, it's being uplifted. That is true. Borneo is coming up, so Mount Kinabalu is also coming up. You get the point there. But this is where a lot of tour guides got it wrong. Because nobody will go on to climb Mount Kinabalu if you say that Mount Kinabalu is still rising actively at Saturn. If you listen to Sabah Park's promo, that's what they say. I told them, replace that. It's wrong. You have to replace that. He said, yeah, we will do it, but still it's there. So, now that there are a lot of things that we need to correct, but we need to correct this slowly. So I'm going towards the end already. So, we come to the fossil record of tropical forest. Because our question is, when did this forest come? Now we know the geology, but the geology doesn't give us all the answer. We need to know the evolution of forests. And from geological records of pollen and macrofossils, and I'm referring this to the work by Robert Morley. He is the expert of this thing. He did a book on this. He is saying that roughly the fossil record says about 80 million years old. So 130 million is gone in this stage. So you're talking about pollens that doesn't exist, or probably at that time. And you can actually see. And so this is just an example. Well, you can read it if you want, but you have no time for that. And in terms of plant dispersal, according to Molly again, this angiosperm, they are as old as the late Cretaceous, about 7 to 85 million, originated from Africa, came to India, and then only came towards this part. And it came towards this part only in the Paleocene time, 60 million years ago. It came. So some hint here already, kan? Some hints that, your forest is coming up. Yeah. And so, in terms of plant dispersal, according to Molly again, the highest dispersal occurred about 40 to 50 million years. So a lot of diversity, tropical plant diversity, really blossomed during this 40 to 50. Of course, there was once earlier, but this is not so clear. But this one is very clear. And basically, this was due to that when India collided with Asia. That happened about 40 million years ago. About 40 million years ago. And because of that, the land mass, India and Asia was connected. Then you have connected, all this land became available. And so plants can actually migrate more or less southeastward. And now we want to look at the age of mangroves. Based on the date of the age of mangroves, Molly again, most of the mangroves that has been dated is about 55 to 75 million years old. This is based on the pollens and spores. So this is the work of Molly. But if you look at the age of mixed flora, that one is specifically for mangrove, the rhizo group. This one is mixed, all sorts of things. And if you look at records from Africa, South America, and India, you can actually see that Africa has the oldest record of pollens. It's about 90 million years old. South America, 60. This is in Amazon. So people always say, Amazon is the oldest forest in the world, rainforest in the world. But Africa is much, much older. And then, of course, India is about more or less 60 also. Then, of course, Australia, we have 70 million years old. New Zealand and Irian Jaya, all these are recorded from that. And then, of course, when you come to Burma, Thailand, and Indonesia, most of the records here are quite young. It's about 45. If you remember how the plant migrated from Africa to India and then only came to our side. So we have some good guess now that the 40, 50 million years must be the time that, as I said, it flourished. And probably, this is where probably Borneo was getting a lot of its tropical tree varieties. Now, in terms of the earliest record of tropical forest in Borneo, the pollen fossil recorded by Mueller, this was done in the 1960s, is considered the best database for earliest tertiary. So he did a good job, this Mueller. He did a good palynological study. And they took samples from the Kayan and Pedawan sandstone. The Kayan and the Pedawan sandstones are well known as continental sediments. They are deposited on land. They are fluvial. They are deposited in a river environment. So there are lots of pollens and plants found there. And initially, his dating the earliest was about 110 million years old. But Robert Morley recently relooked at all his taxa samples. As always, new knowledge evolved, and he managed to put down the age to about 60 to 70 million years ago. Yeah? And how he does it is by referring to that particular pollens that he referred to as 110 million, comparing with the same pollen found in different parts of the world. And so he was able to, rationalize it that, that age should be slightly younger, not older. But paleontological and palynological work evolve. What we probably knows 10 years ago probably is now something can be changed or discarded. Now, looking at more original recent work by findings by Nosa Zwane, they found 15 to 17 million years old mangrove forest in Muka area. These are the pollens that they've been using, and they found out that in Muka, you have dense lowland forest vegetation. So within this 15, 17 million, there's no more secret. Forest has been, coming up. So it doesn't bother us anymore. I'm just showing you evidence now that there's a lot of these things. And at the same time also, from Tanjung, this is near Kalabakan area, a recent work, palynology work done by Hisham and Zainal, also found out, shows a lot of this mangrove forests and coastal and lowland peat swamps around Kalabakan area. Based on these sediments from that area. So they could even draw a model out from that, where you have mangroves, you have land, and those kind of things. In year 2000, I did some work in Maleo Basin. I spent like 2 years there. And I was able to actually map that area and also studied some of the palynological content of the sediments there. And of course, most of it came from the same mangrove forests and swamps. And of course, somebody did it for me. Some specialist guy from Shell did the study of the palynology and provided me with the information. And so I was able to actually draw this model. As you can see, sea, land, and all those kind of things. And in Maleo, you can also see some leaf fossil. Can you see that leaf fossil? And also a lot of coal there. Coals everywhere. Yeah. So, and of course, in Sandakan area, similar findings by John Nod, one of PhD student, which I work with. He found out also a lot of evidence for mangrove forest. And in fact, in Sandakan itself, we can actually find petrified mangrove tree trunk, about 10 to 15 million years old, just near the town. But this has since been built over because of development. This is how development is. They couldn't appreciate this stuff. And so they built over on top of it now. You want to know where it is? You can still go there and probably look for. So this actually, you can actually see they're exactly like those mangrove tree. Modern mangrove, and you look at it, and then this one, more or less the same. So here you are, Sandakan was area, whoever comes from Sandakan. Now, and there was an exciting find recently in Brunei, where they found out a proper fossil leaves. And this was done by Wilf and his companion. And they found a complex coastal rainforest dominated by dipterocarps. There's a lot of fossils. So you can imagine. You can see exactly. You can even see, that wing dipterocarp seeds that comes down. You can even see that as a fossil for evidence. And there's more to this. So the 5 million. But of course, 5 million is already recent. We are asking how old is our forest in Sabah. And it's how we come up with towards the end now. So the final slide will be some of my thoughts about the possible age of the tropical forest in Sabah. Yeah. So probably you know by now already. So basically, based on paleogeography of Sabah, landmass, it probably existed about 90 million years ago, as I said. And so the earliest tropical forest may have existed during that time. However, the lack of fossil records during this time, globally, the lack of fossil record, as I said, makes this possibility quite low. Yeah. So although we might have land, but tropical forest has not really evolved as such. Because if you look at the migration of forests, it came all the way from Africa and then into India and later here. And so probably there's already a forest, the Sabah forest. Sabah forest meaning our own first, not so diverse. So the presence of landmass around 60 million years ago most probably have already supported tropical forest system. So there you go, about 60 million years ago, probably we have land and supported that, because at this time also, in Sarawak, they found a lot of tropical forests already. Pollens found in around Kuching area. Yeah, so this is supported by the event. And of course, since Oligocene time, huge area of Sabah has now been uplifted, and probably was the time where tropical forest really expanded and continued up until today. So that one we didn't need to discuss. We have already, I think, answered why we came here today. And so, to conclude, so the exact age of the tropical forest in Sabah, as I see it, we are still unsure, uncertain, exact age. Yeah? Because the fossil record is quite limited. Even that, the record in Sarawak is very limited, and we have not much information in Sabah by itself. However, as I said, if you combine the geological history of Sabah and we combine with the evolution of tropical plant, we put them together, we imagine, and then we can probably safely say, a good estimate, we're about 60 to 70 million years old. We already have a forest in Sabah. Isn't that wonderful? So it's still old forest. Don't get disappointed. Not 130 million, but we still have more than nearly 300 million years old rock in Danam. So Glenn, don't get disappointed that your forest now is younger than you expected maybe. But this is the evidence, scientific evidence, as you said. So I think there's still a lot of work needs to be done in terms of palynology. Not many scientists, not many geologists are into palynology, I must tell you. The reason why we don't have this much information is that a lot of geologists doesn't go into this kind of work. Because it's a very tedious kind of work. Very, very, very tedious kind of work. And you sit hours and hours in a lab, look at microscope, and then identify them, separate them, and take a long time. So only those who are dedicated to do it will be able to do it. So I hope that somebody will come up and do more studies, especially we have some sedimentary rocks like the Sapulut formation, as I said. They are possibly the best candidate to study. There are a lot of muds there, but no one has actually studied palynology in that. And if we study that, probably we'll get more information about more precise age of the tropical forest in Sabah, based on the pollens, of course. And who knows, you might find leaves also at that time, because it's already land at that time. And so, for further reading, probably you can actually read this book, The Origin of the Evolution of Tropical Forest by Robert Morley. It was done in year 2000. It's a very thick book, and it's available in UMS library. There are 4 copies there. I was so happy. I went there, found a copy, and it was a very interesting reading. It opened up my mind about the age of the forest. And with that, I thank you all, physically and those online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Felix, but don't go yet. Now we're having our Q&A sessions. If you have any questions, please raise your hands, state your names and from the where agencies you are. Yeah, Dr. Glenn, please. Even though I know you, but there are people who don't know you, so please.
Okay, thanks very much.
Dr. Glenn, yeah.
Yeah, my name is Glenn from the Southeast Asia Rainforest Research Partnership. Firstly, thanks Felix for such a fantastic talk. It was,
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, and I learned so much that I had no idea about before. 2 quick questions, if I may. Firstly, I mean, it seems pretty solid, the evidence around forest existing I guess in Danam initially, 60 to 70 million years ago, is pretty compelling. But what would that forest have looked like? I mean, we know that one of the characteristic features of the Southeast Asian forest, particularly on Borneo, is the dominance of the dipterocarps. And I probably should know this, but I've no idea at where in the sort of geological, where in geological time the dipterocarps started to assert that dominance. When did, so would it have been the sort of characteristic high canopy dipterocarp dominated forest back at 60, 70 million years ago?
Very good questions. Probably it's difficult to answer, but based on my reading of this book by Robert Morley, he thinks that the first plants, most of these are palms. Palms and mangroves would have evolved. And later, during the 40 million years ago, later, it's about 20 million after that, then you have this huge migration, and whereby then you have this huge dipterocarp as we see now forming. So probably we're looking at 40, 50. So the earlier part probably is mostly mangroves, and they're just palm areas. Most like probably our Nipa area. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And can I ask a second question? Is that okay? In the Kwamut Forest Reserve,
Yes.
on the western side of Kwamut,
Yeah.
there's a very peculiar geological feature of concentric rings. Do you know what's going on there?
Yes. I do.
Good.
So basically, as I said, Sabah, the evolution of Sabah, although most of the land has already come up by about maybe 30, 25 million years ago, but somehow that particular area in central part of Sabah started to sink. And there were like a lot of faults or structures which controlled all this circular shape. Yeah, I've actually explained this in one of my papers a long time ago on the Malay, so you can actually refer that again. So basically, it's interesting. The Kwamut area is an area where it sank. And then other areas came up, but this area around Kwamut and central part sank. And that's why it's still a very lowland area. But most of it now has already been uplifted again. And so it's controlled by some form of sagging and some structural control there. It's very, very complicated to explain, but I know what you mean. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Johan. I used to do voluntary work at wetlands a couple of years ago. Now, my question's a bit more towards dinosaurs. And that is, 50, 60 million years ago was pretty much the time of the Chicxulub crater thing. Were there any dinosaurs in Sabah? Thank you.
Okay, very good questions. At the moment, we have not found any evidence of dinosaur. Although, as I said, land already existed about 60 million. But in fact, dinosaur existed way before that. Jurassic time was where dinosaur was, before the meteorite came and killed most of them. So during this time, most of Borneo was probably under the sea. So dinosaur won't be there, but the possibility of dinosaur in Peninsular Malaysia is there. Because Peninsular Malaysia is already land at that time, together with Thailand. As you see, it's already part of the established Sunda land. Yeah? So you might be wondering, so meaning that the forest in Peninsula might be older than Sabah because land existed way before Sabah or Borneo. It doesn't have to, because you must remember that even if your land existed earlier, in Peninsular Malaysia, it was grassland, it was dry. So only later, about the same time as 60 million years ago, that all these tropical forests came. So probably we have the same age in Peninsula. The whole Borneo, probably we have more or less the same age. I'm just adding, I just remembered. This is interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Professor, we have 3 questions from Zhishen Lim online. The first question is there any evidence from the geology of Sabah that parts of it had been covered with savanna-type vegetation during the last glacial period?
I have not read extensively on that, but there were records that this area actually, because of the changes in the climate, part of it has become more cooler, and so we have grassland, the savanna kind of grassland that connects Borneo all the way to Peninsula. Because at that time, during the glacial ice age, you must remember, the sea level was quite different. There was a huge Sunda land before. You can actually walk from Peninsula to Sabah at that time. And so there was possibility of grassland was already there.
Okay. The second question, are there any terrestrial animal fossils preserved in the deposits when parts of Sabah were already above sea? Animal fossils.
Not so evident, but most of the animal fossils are actually from the sea. So if you're talking about terrestrial animals, we have not found a record of that yet.
And the last question, is it true that some birds' footprint fossils had been recorded in Sabah? And are these forest birds?
Yes, we have footprints in Sandakan Formation. That is in the Sandakan area. And those, we are not so sure about these birds. They look like those, white crane kind of birds at that time. So we're not sure whether they have land or they're just migrating into that area. But we have evidence for birds' footprint. And this would be about 15 million years ago.
Thank you, Prof. And we have another question online from Jada Sohaimi. Is the forest in Peninsular Malaya older than in Borneo?
I've just answered that.
Yeah.
I guess,
It's
more or less
already
the same.
almost
More or
the
less the
same.
same because of the, I think, in terms of tropical forest. Of course, because the rocks there have older and they become land much, much earlier. In Triassic time, about 300, 250 million, most of it is land already. But it has a different climate. So it cannot be tropical yet. But there's already like vegetation there.
Okay, another from H. Go. Do you foresee increasingly active tectonic activities in near future?
No, it will continue as usual. It's just that now we have more sensitive instruments. We are more alert. We are more connected. So we seem to think that things are moving faster. But in fact, geologically speaking, they are more or less the same.
And we have another question from Ms. Asniza Mayudin. Hi, Prof. Do you have any idea when the limestone caves being occupied by animals?
No. I have not done research on that yet. Sorry.
So I guess that's all from our online friends here. So any more questions
Physical.
around here?
Hello, my
Hello.
name is Julian Miles. I'm just an interested observer. But could you tell me how you give an absolute age to rocks and geological deposits?
Yes, okay. So we can use 2 types based on the relative age of fossils. That is quite relative. And if you want to do a more accurate absolute, you do this potassium argon. It's a radioactive method that has been used, and that would pinpoint the ages more accurately. Whereas fossils is relative. How it evolved, we compare with what has already been known, and if you find similar kind of things, then we say that that rock probably more or less the same. So it's very relative. But like Mount Kinabalu, for example, we are able to determine the age accurately by using radioactive methods. And we can pinpoint it to be 7 to 9 million years old. It used to be very generalized. People said Mount Kinabalu is, in between, in between. Now there's no more in between. We are very precise, about 7 to 9. After that, no more. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions from our friends here? No? With that, no? We have another one from Abigail. My question is, what could the earliest animals look like in the earliest forest 60 to 70 million years old compared to the wildlife diversity in Danum Valley today?
Sorry, I have no idea, but I assume that mouse would be running around because they've been running around for a long time and they're the best survivor, I guess. So they'll be around there, I think. But the rest, I don't know. Cockroach, maybe. Ants, maybe already there, but different from that, probably, I have no idea.
Okay, last questions for today's sessions because we're over the time. It's almost 11:35.
Okay.
So last questions from Abdul Fuad Ahmad. As we know, Langkawi Island was formed somewhere between 550 million years ago and 500 million ago. What when is the possibilities for the forest to start develop on the island? Will it be the same time as the forest in Peninsula Malaya?
Yes, although Langkawi is quite old, one of the oldest rock in Malaysia is in Langkawi, but actually Langkawi, if you look at the geological history, it came from the south. It drifted from the south, it was attached to Antarctica, and slowly it drifted up, and you can imagine that although your rock is 500 million years old, it was some way very cold. So there was no, the vegetation would have been different. And so when we finally arrive in Peninsula, it's more or less the same with the rest of Peninsula. Yeah.
One special question.
Just one question. I'm Zaini from the Sabah Wetland Conservation Society. Just now I picked up from Professor in your presentation, you mentioned about the oldest mangrove tree in Sabah, located in Sandakan. And sadly, it has been cut down. Do you have pictures of that before it was cut down and location? Maybe this society want to do something about it.
Oh,
Thank
yes. Yeah. It's actually just near the town. We have, because I've looked into it, those pictures are mine. So we did work on that, and we were hoping last time to turn that site into a geological heritage site. But as it's quite complicated, you need to, gazette it first as, conservation area and a heritage site, and then later on, then you can actually do. It's owned by, privately owned. So people can actually do whatever with their land, and there's no one stopping them in that sense. And so we left it as it is. And, but of course, there'll be new places that will be cut in Sandakan. And if we are actually, Rajin, you go around and look for it, you can still see. Because it's the same formation. It's a Sandakan formation. So Sandakan formation, a lot of mudstone, very thick mudstone. So this come out from the mud, actually. It just happened that area was cleared, and so all this trunk was exposed.
Okay.
What final
What
question?
final question? You want to accept
Yes,
one final?
I'm okay.
Yes, please.
We still have time. We have until 12 o'clock again.
Prof.
Let them.
Good morning, Prof.
Yes.
So I'm Bernard. I'm attending this on my personal capacity, but I'm working with Borneo Rainforest Lodge, which is in Danum Valley. So I would like to ask, actually based on this info that we have right now, which is it's not 130 millions, it's actually younger than that. So is there any work that is being done to inform as a whole or as general to Sabah tourism by UMS or any other forms of to correct the information so that we can correct the information as a whole in Sabah itself from 130 million to 90 million or 60 million like that? Thank you, Prof.
Very good question, but started today already. That is one of the main objectives of why we came here. And that's why we were hoping a lot of those who bring tourists around would come. And most of you came. And yeah, the education has started. And actually, we also have probably newspaper people. And if you can start working on what I've already said, I think that could be a good start. I don't think there will be like a formal process whereby we like to inform everyone that to disappoint you, that I don't think there's something like that. It happens naturally, gradually, and as I said, 130 million years date came from somewhere. Now this new date, at least came from someone. And you can actually, if there's something wrong with it, you just put that professor, that silly professor is wrong. I take it, that's science. I only tell you what I know. More than that, I don't know. So we have to wait. As I said, more studies need to be done. And once we have that, we have more precise age. As of now, we are looking into that kind of age that we are talking just now.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Like what Prof mentioned, we have a lot of time.
Yeah. We have to.
So
Zoom will
we have
die
another
at
questions from one last questions online. One, please, one. Okay, from Gordon John.
Okay.
Hi, Prof. Any evidence that the Sabah forests have been influenced by early population?
What? Early population.
Yeah. Any evidence that the Sabah forests have been influenced by early population?
That one I cannot answer, but based on Robert Morley's work, he thinks that the diversity of forests that we have now actually was due to the migration of plants, as I said earlier, from Africa, India, and came all over. And that was during the Eocene. But other parts, for example, coming from the southern part of the Wallace Line from Australia, and also from basically Australia and then Sulawesi at that time also contributed to the diversity, rich diversity of plants here. So there was a gradual increase in diversity of plants. Yeah.
Okay, with that, thank you very much, Prof. It's almost 1 hour. You're standing up.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you
everyone.
very much.
Thank you.